Scramblers seem to be all the rage these days, and with good reason. The Scrambler format, it offers a good alternative to someone who's looking to deal with Indian roads that much better without really having to commit to a hardcore ADV or an off-road bike. Now, because it's a Scrambler, you're not really sacrificing on the road dynamics of the bike as well. Now you have entry-level offerings like the Triumph Scrambler 400X, you have the Husqvarna Swatpillion 401, Royal Enfield has the Scram 411, and they're already working on the bigger Himalayan 450 based Scrambler. But what happens when you're done with those bikes and you want to upgrade to a bigger Scrambler? Well, what I have here today might be the answer to that. This is the Ducati Scrambler Full Throttle. It's the sportiest Scrambler offering in their range, and this is our first ride review of this bike. Now, before we proceed, do give this video a thumbs up if you like it, share it with like-minded enthusiasts. If you haven't already, subscribe to the Evo India YouTube channel and smash that bell icon to stay notified for all things thrill of riding. Now, this belongs to the Scrambler 2G family, and what the 2G essentially is the second generation of Scramblers. Now, that comes after Ducati has sold over 1 lakh Scramblers worldwide, and a good thing is that Ducati hasn't really strayed away from the Scrambler formula in that sense. What we have here is minor updates that really makes up the generational change. So to that front, all the changes that are standard across the range is what I'm going to be telling you about first. So at the front, you have this new headlight. Now, the X motif, it stays, but the overall design of the headlight is sharper. And in the same way, on the other end of the spectrum, you have the tail light, which again uses that same semicircle design inspiration, but it is slightly sharper. Both still remain LED units, but the overall theme is that this is slightly sharper, slightly more youthful than it was before. Next up is the tank. You have a new reprofiled tank. Now, on the Icon, the tank panels are changeable, so you don't have the base 3 colors. You can also choose from 6 other colors that Ducati will sell you, so there's a total of 9 color options there. Functionally, there are a few mechanical changes as well. The tank has a slightly different profile. The new trellis frame is lighter than before, and it also uses a subframe instead of a full single piece frame, so that will improve serviceability as well. Now, you also have a new fully color 4.3-inch TFT screen that replaces the semi-analog instrument cluster from before, and that's about the changes on the Scrambler range overall. What we have now are the changes that are unique and bespoke to this full throttle variant. Now, the full throttle variant is the range-topping variant in the Scrambler family, and this is inspired by a flat track machine. Flat tracking is essentially a form of motorsport where you have a bike, no front brakes, there's a nice dirt track oval, and you're just going sideways through and through. So this bike, it takes inspiration from that type of motorcycle, and to that end, you have a smaller front fender, you have no rear fender whatsoever. You have this beautiful black and red color scheme that's inspired from the Desmo Sedici GP19, which is Ducati's MotoGP bike. Then you have this seat with these red accents. If you notice the rims, they also have red accenting on them. Now, owing to the fact that this is the sportiest Scrambler of the 3, you also have a slightly lower handlebar to make the riding position that much more aggressive. Now, continuing with what's bespoke to the full throttle, you have an engine sum card, as you can see over there. You have these turn signals, which are sportier, slimmer and smaller, part of the Ducati Performance package. And continuing with the Ducati Performance package, you also have the Termignoni exhaust, which is road legal, and it comes as standard fitment. Now, overall, I really like the way the Scrambler looks. I like that they haven't strayed away from the previous Scrambler formula, because that, in my opinion, is quite a funky looking bike, and this retains that. And I also like how much sharper it has gotten with the small updates in the second generation family. Now, one thing I do want to mention is just how small this bike actually is. The photos don't really do justice to how small this bike is in person, and looking at it, it doesn't look that much bigger than a Duke 390. And that is actually a good thing, because shorter riders will have no trouble getting on this bike and having a good time with it right away. Now that I've told you what I think about the way this bike looks, it's time to tell you how this performs. But before I go ahead, you do notice that Termignoni exhaust, right? Let's have a listen at what that sounds like. So now that you've heard what this exhaust sounds like, let's talk about the engine that it is mated to. Now this engine is mated to a 6-speed gearbox, and the clutch has also been revised. It uses 8 plates now, and that, according to Ducati, has resulted in a lighter clutch pull. And in the real world, the clutch pull actually does feel fairly light. It is also hydraulically actuated, so that does make things a lot easier, and especially considering that you're going to be spending a lot of time with this bike in the city, having that light clutch pull, it makes life a lot easier. One thing I'm not particularly fond of is the heat and the heat management. Like I said, this is air cooled, so some sort of active cooling or better heat management would be nice, because sometime in Pune city traffic and your legs do start getting roasted. Now what you have here is an 803cc air-cooled L-twin engine, which at the face of it sounds very similar to the bike it replaces, but internally Ducati has made a lot of changes. A, to make it meet emission norms, and B, to make it that much more punchy than before. So what you do have after all the changes is a lighter engine. So this weighs around 2 kilos less than the engine it replaces. Power figures stand at 72 bhp at 8,250 rpm and 62.5 newton meters of torque at 7,000 rpm. But what is this like in the real world? One thing that really surprised me is just how easy this bike is to ride. Now Ducatis, they have been notoriously known to be really choppy bikes to ride, ones that need to be revved out to really enjoy them, and more than enjoy them, ones that need to be revved out to be able to ride them at all. But this is a stark departure from that. Now the V4 engine bikes did address that to a big extent, but this is still an L-twin, and despite that, you can actually ride this bike below 3,000 rpm. Now it won't stutter, it won't scream murder and stall all the time, but it is actually quite usable under 3,000 rpm, which means that higher gears, lower speeds is something that you can realistically do. And that is a boon, because this after all is an air-cooled engine and it does run quite hot in the city. So constantly having to rev it out will just increase the temperatures. So the fact that you can ride at a mellow pace at a higher gear does make things quite nice. But that being said, this is still a Ducati, this is a performance-oriented bike, and that 8,250 rpm figure where it makes peak power does hold true, because after around 4,500 when you're on the gas, you feel this nice wave of power just take over. You're accelerating really hard, and that acceleration stays still nearly the red line. So it's not like the power tapers off somewhere around the RPM range. This does pull cleanly and nicely almost till the red line, and it's quite engaging to ride. But the way it delivers its power, it's not intimidating at all. Someone upgrading from a 40 bhp bike can actually get used to the power delivery of this fairly quickly. And while they are doing that, they can always opt for the road mode instead of going into sport mode, because the calibration is quite different. It is softer in road mode, and it's that much easier to manage and get a hold of before you actually change to sport mode. But once you do understand what this bike is like to ride, once you get comfortable with the power delivery, sport mode is the place to be. The throttle response is a lot crisper. The exhaust, it really is sounding a lot better at that rev range, because it's a lot sharper. Everything sounds more engaging, everything is more exciting, and the power delivery is great as well. Now this power delivery is aided by a great chassis setup, and that's what we're going to be talking about next. Now let's talk about the way the Scrambler full throttle rides and handles. Now the center of it is a trellis frame. Now this trellis frame is not like the one that the previous Scrambler had. This is a new trellis frame. Ducati has worked on it heavily, A, to make it lighter. So this now is almost 2 kilos lighter than the frame it replaces, which along with the lighter engine contributes to the over 4 kilos of weight savings that they have managed to accomplish. Apart from that, it also uses a split design in the sense that the subframe is now bolted onto the main frame, and it's not one continuous unit. Now this subframe being bolted on should help in the case of an accident, and repairs should be that much more easier. Now in terms of the rest of the chassis setup, the trellis frame, it's mounted on a 41mm Kayaba upside down fork setup at the front and a preload adjustable Kayaba monoshock at the rear. The rear being preload adjustable is all the adjustability that you get on the suspension setup, which is not particularly a bad thing considering the way that the suspension setup is pretty good for our roads. In typical Ducati fashion, it is a little on the stiffer side, but that stiffness, it really pays dividends when you're going faster at 120, 130, even higher, which you shouldn't be doing on our roads. But even at higher speeds like that, the bike feels stable and planted. But at the same time, out on regular roads in city speeds, the bike is not uncomfortably stiff by any means. Most imperfections and bumps, it irons out pretty well. Some of them still do translate to the rider, because after all, it is a stiffer suspension setup, but I wouldn't really complain about that. Rear with a pillion is also quite comfortable, to be honest. There's a slight kickback if you're with a pillion and you go over a sharp speed breaker, but adjusting the preload to match the weight of both the riders should iron that issue out to an extent. Now, in terms of the handling, again, a Ducati, so it handles quite well. As you can see, the ergonomics, I am 5'10". I look fairly big on the bike, but it's not actually that uncomfortable to be on. The 795mm seat height should mean that shorter riders can come and sit on this comfortably without having to worry about getting their feet flat on the ground. As you can see, there is a significant bend in my leg, which means that the foot pegs are slightly rear set and taller. So that does help in the cornering function of things, and your upper body is reaching to a nice wide handlebar, which in the case of this full throttle is placed shorter than on the other two variants, again owing to the sporty nature of this machine. This wide handlebar, it really comes in handy when you're filtering through traffic, and that in combination with the way that the foot pegs are set up means that this is a good time in the corners as well. Now coming to the corners, let's talk about the wheel setup. You have a 110 section tire at the front and a 180 section tire at the rear. These are wearing Pirelli's MT60 RS tires. Now these are significantly blocked, they are dual purpose tires, but you're not really compromising on road grip at all. Even in the corners, this does feel stable, this does feel confidence inspiring, and at the same time when you do come off-road, well, not really far off-road because this is a Scrambler, again it's not a proper off-roader, but when you do come off-road, you have the blocks to take care of grip levels when the surfaces are loose. Now talking about off-roading, I wouldn't really go very far off-road on this, primarily because of the way the ergonomics are set up. It's not extremely conducive to standing up and riding. The way things are set up does come in the way of that. But again, the whole function of a Scrambler is to be able to go where roads don't exist, and that shouldn't necessarily slow you down. So to that end, the 150mm of travel that you get on both the front and rear suspension, bash plate that you get for the engine, and the overall ride setup, it makes for a bike that can go to a certain degree off-road, and you don't really need to worry about hurting your bike. So in that sense, I feel like this does nail the Scrambler function of things. Could you do with a little more off-roadability? Yes, of course, I would have liked a little more off-roadability with this bike, but then again, if I wanted an off-roader, I could have always opted for an ADV. There is the Desert X for that if I so choose to have that. Now in terms of braking, you have a 330mm disc at the front with a Brembo 4-piston caliper at the front biting onto that 330mm disc. At the rear, you have a 245mm disc with a single piston Brembo caliper. Now braking performance is solid. There is adequate bite from the brake when you get on the levers. The levers are adjustable, so that is great. Braking progression also builds up pretty nicely, so you do get decent braking power. But one thing I do want to point out is that the cornering ABS is a little intrusive. It's a little more intrusive than I would have liked, at least, because even the smaller undulations of the road, if by chance, on the off chance you happen to grab the brakes at that point, ABS locks in and you're braking for a lot longer than you would like to. So the ability to get a softer, lesser aggressive tune would have been nice, and this also doesn't disengage ABS at the rear, so that is one thing to note when you do get the bike off-road. So this is dual channel ABS all the time. The traction control, however, doesn't really intervene as much, and that is good. In terms of electronics, this is not the most feature-packed Ducati. You do get the quick shifter as standard fitment, you get the LED lights, you get traction control, and you get cornering ABS. That's about all that you get on the electronics and rider aids front. You also get power mode, so you can adjust the throttle calibration of the bike. Apart from that, you get two ride modes, sport and street. That's about it. But then again, that's about all the electronics you really want from a bike of this class. So in the start of the video, I asked you whether or not this is a good alternative for someone upgrading from a sub 500cc Scrambler should consider. Well, after riding it around Pune, in the twisties, in the ghats, and on the highway, I think the short and sweet answer to this is yes, this is quite a good upgrade for someone looking to get a bigger Scrambler motorcycle. At rupees 12 lakhs ex-showroom, this is the most expensive Scrambler in the Ducati lineup. That is because this gets a lot of features as standard fitment. This gets the Termignooni exhaust, like I said, the quick shifter is standard fitment. You get these LED lights, you get a sump guard as well, along with a few other bits and bobs here and there. Now 12 lakhs is a little pricey if you think about it, but for the sheer riding joy that this Ducati is capable of giving you, I feel like that 12 lakhs is something that deserves your test ride to consider whether or not you should be getting one. From a functional standpoint, this will deliver most of what you're looking for from a Scrambler. This won't go as far off-road as some other Scramblers, say something like the Triumph Scrambler, but still at the same time, this is quite competent off-road and on-road as well, as long as you know where you're taking it. So ultimately, should you be considering the Ducati Scrambler full throttle? I feel you should. What do you think about this Ducati Scrambler full throttle? Let me know in the comment section down below, and thank you for watching.